Great to talk Buffalo Bills as they get ready to take on Indianapolis. Life looking pretty good in Buffalo at the exact halfway point of the season. Aaron Quinn joins the show, host of Cover One Buffalo podcast, to talk about it. Aaron, great to chat with you. Thanks so much for joining us. And, well, let's just take a breath for a second and look at the Bills 9 games into the season. You know, Aaron, 7-2 is a great record, but what's even greater, when you got a 4-game lead in your division halfway through the season, you got to be feeling pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Raj. And, yeah, it's been pretty good, especially with the way the national media, at least, was talking about the Bills here going into the offseason, all spring and summer, as, you know, this is a retooling. They lost so much talent with some of the big names that left, and that, you know, everybody hopped on Miami and the Jets as this was going to be an overtaking of the division. And now, like you said, halfway through, it looks like it's still the same old AFC East that has been here since the Sean McDermott era really started, specifically since Josh Allen got into the AFC East. So things are looking good, but we as Bills fans do know they still got to handle business and take care of it. Colts, the record doesn't look great, but they can be frisky, and then the schedule here coming up can get a little bit hairy for them. So they still got to handle their business. Some injuries are piling up. You don't want to let any of these teams get any life. We saw last year at this time, it looked like Miami had a nice stranglehold on the division, and then the Bills went off and rattled off wins, and Miami sort of lost it at the end. So that was a lesson I hope the Bills saw and learned and continue to play the way they've been playing here the first 9.
No doubt. You got to play out the season and all the games. That's a very valid point. Let's talk about those injuries, and they really are adding up. Cooper, Coleman, there's a lot of injuries heading into this game in Indianapolis. One thing, though, that I think Allen has been able to do, and I think with the emergence of Cook as well as a running threat, Aaron, is this team isn't as one-dimensional maybe as it was. There are other options. Josh Allen knows how to manage a game, I think, now as his career gets more mature. I think he gets even better as a quarterback who just knows how to win football games. But talk about the challenges with the depleted lineup.
Yeah, it's tough, too, with this week with the wide receivers being out, because I think, you know, in previewing this matchup on our show, one of the things I was looking forward to would be either an Amari Cooper or a Keon Coleman being there, because I think that's probably where Indy is the most vulnerable and susceptible on defense, is 2 wide receiver 1 and 2s on the outside. Maybe Khalil Shakir can get going. They have some other guys there, but those injuries could be here pretty tough going through. I don't even know if they're going to be ready for the Kansas City game. It doesn't sound great the way Sean McDermott was talking specifically with Keon Coleman, that they were kind of having conversations of whether or not he would be designated as IR, but they thought he'd be able to return maybe before that. And the Bills do have the bye coming up, so that kind of tells me that it might be around a 2 to 3 week thing. So personally, I'm cautiously optimistic that he could go before that, but I'm not going to hold my breath for it. And he was developing so nicely, right, which opened up so many things for other people. And you haven't seen Josh Allen, to your point of his maturity in the as a quarterback. He's not taking the big, deep shots the way he used to, right? If Josh Allen even saw a little bit of an opening for a deep shot years past, he wants that. He's an aggressive player. The Bills are taking those 15-plus air yard throws less than pretty much every team right now. He's really kind of taken what the defense gives him, allowing guys to make plays after the catch. And Keon Coleman has been kind of the guy he does go to in those shots here so far this year and giving him the one-on-one. So I don't expect that to change. I think he's going to still kind of have to take what the defense gives him. Even if he wants to go deep, I don't know that he's got the horses right now to really make that type of play.
I don't know, Aaron, if it's, I'm sure because you guys analyze the Bills very closely because it's a team of the city, so I get that. But you talked about the national media, how they thought about the Bills at the start of the year. I still think there's some kind of, I don't want to say it's a bias against the Bills. That's not true at all.
Sure.
But you know, they just maybe look at Buffalo a little differently or maybe don't pay enough attention because I don't think Josh Allen's getting enough. I mentioned his maturity and everything else. So you look at the Bills, they're 17th in passing yards, 17th in rushing yards. And on the surface, it doesn't look like that a great a season. And then even in Allen, he just went over 2,000 yards after 9 games. That's, you know, a bit below the career average. But 17 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions. That's not the Allen we've seen in previous years. 18 interceptions last year, 14, 15 the year before. Just talk, that's what I meant by the maturity in terms of what kind of a quarterback he's become now.
Yeah, the statistics aren't as maybe gaudy as they have been in other years for Josh Allen in terms of just volumes of yardage and things like that, and the splash plays that we're used to seeing him, the hero ball stuff. And obviously he's not needing to run over people and jump over people, so the highlights aren't as exciting maybe as they used to be. But I think you're right in that Sean McDermott has really tried to prioritize a little bit more balance in this offense, and he was kind of killed for that of, hey, you're going to take the ball out of Josh Allen's hands if you run it too much. But I think the running game has actually unlocked their ability to do some of the things that they wanted to do, and that you see some of the best offenses in football do, right? Like create a ground game and give your offense balance, and it allows some guys to get open. You can use some more play action on first down and get things a little easier than having just to rely on Josh Allen being hero, right? We always talk about his hero ball and the plays that he can make. Those are great, and we want him to still make those, but you don't want to live on that. And the Bills got themselves into some trouble in years past, relying on him to just always make the play out of structure. And now they're playing within structure. And you talked about some of the stats. Raj, one I love is DVOA. It is from FTN Fantasy. It basically compares your team to the league averages using advanced metrics. The Bills' offense is fourth overall. They're third in passing and sixth in the run game. And so this is still an offense that is playing at an elite level. But we haven't seen in the Josh Allen era an offensive line playing this well, both in the pass protection and in the run game. And it's really allowing them to have more balance and dictate things a little bit more on the offensive side.
Yeah, well, that shows you once again where sometimes the metric analytic stats give you a different perspective of a team's offense. And the Bills are fourth in points scored, too. So they're finding ways to put points on the board. You talked about the rushing, and that's another element, I think, that is improved in this franchise, as we all know. And James Cook in particular, I mean, who's carried the ball 109 times this year, on track for another 1,000-yard season. That extra element, what's that meant to make the Bills a tougher team to defend for a lot of teams, especially, when you get into maybe tighter playoff games, bad conditions where the rushing game becomes even that much more important?
Yeah, and again, this is something that Sean McDermott faced a lot of pushback here locally when he talked about wanting to create a little more physicality on the offensive side of the ball, and he's a defensive-minded coach, so I think you kind of got to listen to some of, he knows how to beat some of these defenses, and we've heard so much about two high shells and zone coverages really impacting offense's ability to get those big plays, and I think you're seeing KC, even though they're winning a lot of games, their struggles of beating some of that because their run game isn't necessarily as consistent and they're not that type of physical team. I think, James Cook, we talked about it at the end of year on our show quite a bit of the efficiency that he has really was only rivaled by a Christian McCaffrey in terms of all-purpose yards. And we're not saying he is a Christian McCaffrey, right? There's not a lot of those guys in the world. But to have a back that's that dynamic in the run and pass game just adds so much a different layer. And then you add in the rookie Ray Davis, who brings a nice complementary style and is also good in the run and pass game to this team to give James Cook some of those breathers so he doesn't have to wear down as we get towards the playoffs here, has been just a really nice bonus. And the one last thing I want to talk about in the run game is this offensive line, because early in Josh Allen's career, it was kind of the one hole on this team, both in pass protection, and they weren't great in the run game either. And Aaron Cromer came along, and Deion Dawkins is playing his absolute best football. I was a very big critic of Spencer Brown earlier in his career. He is turning out to be a real gem. They just continue to develop. They lost Mitch Morse. They haven't missed a beat. This offensive line is playing the best I've seen in the Josh Allen era. And I think that it shows up in the run and pass game.
Definitely does. Agreed there. So what about on the defensive side of the ball? I know, and you mentioned the national media and some people who thought the Bills might be in for a reload season. It wasn't just because they had lost some talent offensively, but there was concerns that they were going to give up too many points, and it wasn't going to be a team and that physicality, grinding team come playoff time. Yet again, point differential of plus 87. 173 points allowed this season, one of the tops in the AFC, not the best but by any stretch of the imagination. But is the defense, in your mind, good enough, all around enough to take this team as deep as they want to go, Aaron?
I like this defense, I think, maybe a little more than others. Again, in the stat that I really like, DVOA, they're 10th overall. They are 15th against the pass, so that's about average, right? And then they are 6th against the run. Even though the run doesn't necessarily probably feel like they're a top 10 team against the run, that's a DVOA, again, accounts for the opponent. So they're not going to grade you poorly because Derrick Henry ran all over you, because he's running all over pretty much everybody, right? And that Miami game felt really bad to Bills fans because Miami was able to run all over them. That's a really dynamic run game that Miami has. And when Tua's also playing well, very hard to stop league-wide. And so those concerns are still there, but I don't know that they're as big as necessarily the feeling on that is. I like this defense. The problem I'm having with them right now is Bobby Babich, the new defensive coordinator, has a bit of a different style in calling this defense than maybe Sean McDermott did when he was in charge of calling the defense last year. We saw a lot more blitzing from Sean McDermott, generating pressure that way. This year, they're really kind of sitting in their zone, not wanting to give up the big passing plays, which is working, but that makes you a little susceptible to the run. And if your defensive line isn't generating pressures and isn't stopping the run, you give up probably too many of these 10, 12-yard plays, and that feels really difficult to watch, and that makes it feel like the defense isn't doing their job. They do have a bit of a bend but don't break aspect to them where they give up a lot of yards in between the 20s and they hold teams to field goals. That's a dangerous game to play against some good teams. So I want to see either some of the guys like an Ed Oliver step up, create more pressure. Von Miller just coming back from suspension. I think that he was looking real good before that, generating a little more pressure, getting involved in the run game. And Greg Rousseau has actually been very pleasant surprise, one of the better defensive ends in football right now. But he needs a little more help along that line. Terrell Bernard's been kind of in and out with injury here early this year. They're going to get Matt Milano back, which should help a ton. But they've had injuries on that side of the ball. Taron Johnson missed some time. He's probably the best nickel corner in football. Christian Benford was out last week. He hopefully is going to be back this week. And so they've got a lot of pieces kind of coming and going. So the data's not totally clear. I think if this defense can get healthy, start generating a little more pressure, they'll be just fine come playoffs.
So Indianapolis this week, you alluded to the schedule getting tough, a bye week coming up after next week's game, but you talk about a 4-game stretch of the schedule that any team would be shuddering about no matter how good you are. Going into Kansas City, of course, although the Bills probably welcome that because the Chiefs haven't lost yet. Playing against Kansas City, then San Francisco, players coming back from injury, McCaffrey, a dangerous team, Rams, very competitive team, and Detroit, in the minds of many people, maybe the best team in the NFL now. That's a stretch of 4 weeks. Whoa, Aaron, that's going to be tough.
Yeah, it's not great. And again, some of these injuries, you're hoping guys can come back, heal up. And sometimes with these injuries, like specifically I was talking about Ed Oliver earlier and fans being frustrated with his lack of production. He had a hamstring injury weeks back. Sometimes even though a guy comes back, they're not fully themselves until they're a couple weeks into getting back. So some of these injuries are really on my mind, especially against a Kansas City, a San Francisco, and like you said, Detroit. You want to make sure you got these guys because there are going to be some of these teams, like there's a good chance the Jets could turn some stuff around, right? You know, Aaron Rodgers, can't always count that guy out. They have a lot of talent. If they start running off wins, that could be really annoying at the end of the year. They could catch up to you if you lose 3 out of 4 or something like that. If you go on one of these traditional slumps that the Bills have really had every year, they have a slump sometime in October, November. So you can't really get into that this year. You got to really come out and win these games. But the nice thing for Bills fans is these are going to be tests for who this team really is heading into the playoffs. I don't know how they match up with Kansas City Chiefs right now. I don't think this is the Chiefs' best year, but they keep winning. And so the record shows that they're one of the best teams in the AFC. We're going to find out. Do the Bills match up with that? Are they one of the best teams in the AFC? And then the Lions, I'm with everybody on that. I think that's a team that I would project to go to the Super Bowl at this point. They look pretty difficult to beat. They're kind of running over everyone they come through. I want to see how the Bills' physicality matches up with a team that's that type of physical, because that's going to tell me a lot about who this team is going to be heading into the playoffs.
Well, that's indeed the case. And I guess, Aaron, what's curious to a lot of people who are outside of Buffalo, and you know this better, Bills Mafia, of course, and their and they're great fans supporting the team. But one of the things, and I think one of the reasons maybe the national media started to, get a little, I don't say tired of the Bills, but thinking, oh, well, they may be taking a step back, is, until you punch through, it's the same old, same old. They can win in the regular season. They're a double-digit win team. They're a team that's won their division several seasons in a row. They have an excellent offense. We know all that about them, but until you crash through, it's kind of like here in Toronto watching the Maple Leafs is like the regular season. It really doesn't matter what they do in the regular season. It's all about the playoffs. Is that the kind of mood that there is about the Bills right now, do you think, in Buffalo and even among the organization? And what's the psychology like of, McDermott and company and the coaching staff that has to keep the team motivated to keep winning until, well, obviously they expect and hope to be playing probably at Kansas City since the Chiefs are 8-0 in the playoffs. But what do you do until then, and how do you stay motivated?
Well, I think these guys are all professionals, right? And they all share the same goal. And being 7-2 at this point in the season, I think helps to give that motivation that, we are one of the better teams in the league. And all you got to do is punch your ticket, win your division, punch a ticket, and see how that goes. The NFL is so difficult. You have to run through 3 to 4 games straight. That's hard to do in the regular season, run off 3 wins. And a lot of it relies on how healthy are you at the end of the year? How are you playing? Are you playing your best football at the end of the year, right? Like, that's probably my concern with Kansas City is they're not playing their best football and they're still winning. Are they going to be playing their best football at the right time and continue that winning? That's probably a concern. But in terms of the optics and the national media, the only thing I'd push back on is the Ravens are also kind of that team lately with Lamar Jackson where they're really good. They've been very good in the regular season. They've had the 1 seed before, and they also have failed to break through that wall, but people are still talking about them like they're a juggernaut this year. And I think the Bills are in a similar spot to the Ravens, but the conversation around the two teams seems a little different in that people do feel like the Bills maybe are a little stale and they're not getting it done. And so people aren't necessarily putting their money on the Bills to do it. And I think that's there's a little bit of hypocrisy in there that people feel one way about the Ravens and a different way about the Bills when I don't think they're far off from each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. And referring to the word as stale, maybe that is the best thing. And one of the reasons being stale, though, of course, we saw it at the trade deadline, Aaron, is there's not much flexibility there to do anything. I'm sure they would have liked to have added someone significant at the trade deadline, but just didn't have the financial ability to do it.
Well, I will say, though, I think we did something 2 weeks prior to the trade deadline, and so I think that kind of also changed the optics of what they did at the deadline itself. Sure. Adding Amari Cooper is still a significant move, and it's frustrating that he's not on the field right now and dealing with an injury, so that doesn't help either. You're not getting to use the new toy. But I do think that's going to pay dividends. It's clearly something they needed, even though they were having some success on offense early. The lack of that type of guy that can just get open was showing, and it was kind of hurting some of the other guys like a Keon Coleman, like a Khalil Shakir, who we've seen be crazy efficient, and what a gem he's become. Adding Amari to that allowed all those guys to kind of slot into their spots. And so Brandon being still smart, that was a move where it just happened to time up right, where Cleveland's season was kind of going in the toilet. They paid him early, so all the money was already in Cleveland. They were able to just get him sort of for nothing and fit him into the roster. There wasn't a lot of other players like that out there available that Bean was going to be able to pry off rosters. So you're still relying on developing the guys you have internally. And I'm a big believer that I think they've got the guys. And I really just getting the Amari Cooper trade done, to me, was pretty significant, and that was a big move.
It was indeed, and that's a fair point. And we'll see when he gets back on the field how people feel about the trade deadline or the trade period as we get deeper into the season. Bills have Indianapolis this weekend, and then, of course, a tough stretch of games, Kansas City, San Francisco, and Detroit among their dance card opponents in the 4 weeks after. But first things first, 7-2 to start the season, 4-game lead in the division. Halfway through, the Bills are in great shape. Aaron Quinn is a co-host of Cover One Buffalo podcast, joining us here tonight on SportsNet tonight. Great to chat with you again, Aaron. Thanks so much.
All right, you as well, Raj. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Aaron Quinn joining us, Cover One Buffalo podcast. Stale's a good word he uses in terms of, expectations when you're a consistent team that is always winning, always moving up in the standings, always a contending kind of team, and you never break through. Until you break through, you're always going to be stereotyped as, yeah. And at the start of the year, we did a lot of preseason analysis, brought in experts on the NFL, had a chat with them on the show. And I don't want to say vast majority, but I'm going to say majority because I believe it was a majority, said the Bills have kind of peaked out. And they had some offseason losses, and they are going to start regressing. Now, that may still turn out to be true. We'll see what happens after this stretch of 4 games, after the Indianapolis game. It is possible. And Aaron brought up a great point in terms of the Bills always seem to have that lull at some point in the season where they slip back. It always seems to be the case. But that all said, they are in terrific shape in their division. They're winning games. And, even it's got to the stage where, and I know, the Dolphins were 2-5 coming into the game, but Tua was back, and they were absolutely desperate for the win. And they gave everything they could, and the Bills still win, and the Bills win still comes with the caveat that, they almost blew that game and should have lost that game. And they're not a perfect team. They've got some concerns on the defensive side of the ball, but 7-2 is 7-2. And halfway through the season, I don't know. I think they got to like where they are. Thanks again to Aaron Quinn, co-host of Cover One Buffalo podcast, for his comments on the Bills.